If you've ever wondered what it's like to walk the halls of a place where hope once lived and now only shadows remain, let me take you inside the old St. Augustine Hospital. The building had been abandoned for over 20 years, but the stories never left. People in town whispered about the screams that echoed at night, the lights that flickered in empty windows, and the faces that sometimes appeared in the shattered glass. I'd always been drawn to places like this, where the past lingers and the line between the living and the dead feels paper thin. I arrived just before sunset, the sky bruised with streaks of purple and orange. The hospital loomed over the cracked parking lot, its windows dark and empty, its brick walls stained by decades of rain and neglect. My heart pounded with a mix of excitement and dread. I told myself this was just another urban exploration, another chance to prove that ghosts were nothing more than stories. But as I stood at the entrance, flashlight in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The front doors were chained shut, but a broken window around the side offered an easy way in. I squeezed through, careful not to cut myself on the jagged glass. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of mold. My footsteps echoed down the empty corridor, each one a reminder that I was alone, or at least I hoped I was. I set up my gear in the old lobby, a sleeping bag, a backpack with snacks and water, a digital recorder, and a camera with night vision. I wanted to document everything, to capture proof of whatever haunted this place. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the hospital was swallowed by darkness. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam slicing through the gloom. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and the floor was littered with debris, old medical charts, broken furniture, and the occasional rusted wheelchair. Every sound seemed amplified. The creak of the building settling, the distant drip of water, the scurrying of rats in the walls. I tried to steady my nerves, reminding myself that fear was just a trick of the mind. I started my exploration on the first floor, moving slowly from room to room. The emergency ward was a maze of empty beds and overturned gurneys. I found a child's drawing taped to the wall, faded but still visible, a stick figure family, all smiling, standing in front of a house. It was a jarring reminder that this place had once been filled with life. I snapped a photo and moved on, my footsteps echoing in the silence. As I turned a corner, my flashlight flickered. I smacked it, and the light steadied, but my heart was racing. I told myself it was just old batteries, but a part of me wondered if something or someone was playing with me. Furthermore, I pressed on, determined not to let my imagination get the best of me. I reached the old operating theater, its doors hanging crooked on their hinges. Inside, the room was frozen in time. The operating table sat in the center, rusted and stained, surrounded by broken lights and shattered glass. I ran my fingers over the cold metal, imagining the lives that had been saved and lost here. I set my recorder on the table and spoke into the darkness. It's 8:47 p.m. I'm in the operating room of St. Augustine Hospital. So far, nothing unusual, but the atmosphere is heavy. I'll check back in an hour. I left the recorder running and moved on, exploring the nurse's station and the patient rooms. Most were empty, but a few still held remnants of the past. A child's shoe, a cracked mirror, a faded photograph of a nurse smiling with her arm around a patient. I felt like an intruder, trespassing on memories that weren't mine. As the night deepened, the temperature dropped. My breath fogged in the air, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me. I returned to the lobby to check my gear and grab a snack. As I sat on the cold tile floor, I listened to the playback on my recorder. At first, it was just my own voice echoing in the empty room. But then, beneath the static, I heard something else, a faint whisper, so soft I almost missed it. I rewound and listened again. The voice was there, just on the edge of hearing. It sounded like a child calling for help. A chill ran down my spine. I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows. But I was alone. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just interference or a trick of the acoustics. But the fear was real now, gnawing at the edges of my mind, that I decided to check the pediatric wing, where the stories said most of the hauntings happened. The hallway was lined with faded murals, cartoon animals, and rainbows, now cracked and peeling. The doors to the patient rooms were ajar, swinging gently in the draft. I stepped inside the first room, shining my flashlight over the small bed and the toys scattered on the floor. A music box sat on the windowsill, its paint chipped and faded. I picked it up, winding the key. The melody was slow and warped, echoing through the empty halls as the last notes faded. I heard footsteps behind me, soft, quick, like a child running. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. My heart hammered in my chest. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" Only silence answered. I backed out of the room, my nerves frayed that I moved deeper into the wing, checking each room. In the last room at the end of the hall, I found a name scrawled on the wall in crayon: Emily. The letters were shaky, as if written by a small hand. I snapped a photo, feeling a strange sense of sadness. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to imagine what it must have been like to be a child here, surrounded by sickness and fear. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I jumped to my feet, heart racing. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic rose in my throat. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. Then, just as suddenly, the door creaked open. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were shaking, and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead despite the cold. I told myself it was just the wind, just the old building settling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had closed that door. I forced myself to keep moving, not wanting to linger in the pediatric wing any longer than I had to. The music box melody still echoed in my mind, warped and haunting. I made my way back toward the main corridor, the beam of my flashlight dancing over the peeling paint and broken tiles. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow slipping around a corner, a flicker of white in the darkness. Each time I turned to look, there was nothing there. The silence pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. I tried to focus on the sound of my own footsteps, the crunch of debris under my boots, and the steady rhythm of my breathing. I decided to check the second floor, where the intensive care unit was located. The staircase groaned under my weight, and I gripped the railing tightly, half expecting it to give way. At the top, the air felt even colder, and the darkness seemed deeper, as if the shadows themselves were alive. I swept my flashlight across the hallway, illuminating rows of empty beds and abandoned medical equipment. The walls were covered in graffiti, names, dates, strange symbols I didn't recognize. That I paused outside the ICU, my heart pounding. The stories I'd heard about this place were the worst. Nurses who vanished without a trace, patients who screamed for hours before falling silent forever. I pushed open the door, the hinges shrieking in protest. Inside, the room was a chaos of overturned beds and shattered monitors. I stepped carefully, avoiding the broken glass. In the far corner, I saw a wheelchair facing the wall, as if someone had left it there in a hurry. I approached slowly, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. As I got closer, I saw that the chair wasn't empty. A faded hospital gown was draped over the seat, and a pair of small shoes sat neatly on the floor beneath it. I reached out, almost without thinking, and touched the gown. It was ice cold, as if it had just come out of a freezer. I jerked my hand back, heart racing. Suddenly, the lights flickered. For a split second, the room was bathed in a harsh, white glow. In that instant, I saw a figure standing by the window, a woman in a nurse's uniform, her face pale and her eyes hollow. She stared at me, unmoving, and then the lights went out again. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the debris. When I looked again, the figure was gone. I fumbled for my recorder, my hands shaking. It's 11:12 p.m. I think I saw a nurse. She was standing by the window, but when the lights went out, she disappeared. I don't know if I'm seeing things, but it felt real. I'm going to keep moving. My voice sounded thin and scared, but I didn't care. I needed to document everything to remind myself that I wasn't imagining it. I left the ICU and wandered down the hallway, checking each room. Most were empty, but in one, I found a stack of old patient files. I flipped through them, the pages yellowed and brittle. One file caught my eye. A girl named Emily, admitted in 1998. The notes mentioned frequent nightmares, unexplained bruises, and a tendency to talk to people who weren't there. My skin prickled. Was this the same Emily whose name I'd seen in the pediatric wing? I took a photo of the file and moved on, my mind racing with questions. Who was Emily? What had happened to her? And why did I feel like she was still here, watching me from the shadows? As midnight approached, the atmosphere in the hospital changed. The air grew heavier, charged with a strange energy. The silence was broken by distant sounds, a child's laughter, the clatter of metal, and the faint hum of machinery. I followed the sounds, drawn deeper into the maze of corridors. My flashlight flickered, and I smacked it, desperate to keep the darkness at bay. I found myself in the old maternity ward, the walls lined with faded wallpaper and broken cribs. The air was thick with the scent of dust and something sweeter, almost like flowers. I heard a soft lullaby, barely audible, drifting through the halls. I followed the sound to a small room at the end of the corridor. Inside, a mobile hung from the ceiling, spinning slowly despite the still air. The lullaby grew louder, and I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. I sat on the edge of a crib, listening. The music was beautiful and haunting, filled with longing. I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me. For a moment, I felt at peace, as if the hospital itself was remembering better days. But then the music stopped, and the room grew cold. I opened my eyes and saw a shadow standing in the doorway, a small figure, barely more than a silhouette. I stood, heart pounding, and the figure vanished. Likewise, I rushed into the hallway, searching for any sign of movement. The corridor was empty, but I heard footsteps running down the stairs. I followed my own footsteps, echoing in the silence. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a single crayon, broken in half, lying on the floor. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. The name Emily was scratched into the side. I stared at the crayon in my hand. The name Emily carved into its waxy surface. My breath came in shallow bursts as I tried to process what was happening. Was I really being led through this hospital by the ghost of a little girl? Or was my mind playing tricks on me, weaving stories out of shadows and old memories? I tucked the crayon into my pocket, feeling a strange sense of responsibility. If Emily was here, if she was trying to reach out, I owed it to her to listen. I made my way back to the lobby, the hospital's heart, where my sleeping bag and gear waited. The building felt different now, less like a ruin, more like a living thing, pulsing with secrets. I sat down, pulled out my recorder, and spoke quietly. It's 12:41 a.m. I found a crayon with Emily's name on it. I keep hearing her, seeing her. Furthermore, I don't know what she wants, but I'm going to try to find out. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I decided to rest for a bit, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard footsteps in the hallway or the faint sound of a music box. I sat up, listening, and realized the sounds were coming from the basement. The one place I hadn't dared to go. The stories about the basement were the worst. Patients chained to beds, experiments gone wrong, doctors who disappeared without a trace. But if Emily was down there, I had to follow. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way to the stairwell. The steps creaked under my weight, and the air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, The darkness was absolute. My flashlight barely cut through it, the beams swallowed by the black. The basement was a maze of storage rooms and old equipment, the walls lined with pipes that groaned and rattled. I moved slowly, calling out softly, "Emily, are you here?" A soft giggle echoed through the darkness, and I followed it to a small room at the end of the hall. The door was half open, and inside, the air was freezing. I stepped in, my breath fogging in the air. In the center of the room was a child's bed, rusted and small, with a faded blanket pulled up to the pillow. On the wall above the bed, someone had drawn a picture in crayon: a house, a tree, and a little girl holding hands with a woman. I felt a wave of sadness so strong it nearly knocked me over. I sat on the edge of the bed, the springs creaking beneath me. "Emily," I whispered, "I'm here. What do you want me to see?" The air grew colder, and I felt a presence beside me. I turned, and for a moment, I saw her, a little girl in a hospital gown, her hair tangled, her eyes wide and sad. She looked at me, and I felt her fear, her loneliness, and her longing to be remembered. She reached out, her hand passing through mine like a chill wind. I heard her voice, soft and distant. "Don't forget me." Then she was gone, the room suddenly empty. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, overwhelmed by the weight of her story. I promised her, out loud, that I wouldn't forget. Furthermore, I left the basement, my legs weak, my heart heavy. The hospital felt lighter now, as if a burden had been lifted. I returned to the lobby and packed my things, feeling a strange sense of peace. As dawn crept through the broken windows, I took one last walk through the halls. The shadows seemed less menacing, the silence less oppressive. I paused in the pediatric wing, laying the crayon on the windowsill beneath Emily's name. "Rest now," I whispered. I stepped outside, the morning air crisp and clean. The hospital loomed behind me, its secrets still hidden, but I knew I'd found something real in those haunted halls. I'd come looking for proof of ghosts, and I'd found a story, a little girl who just wanted to be remembered. As I walked back to my car, I felt changed, as if I'd left a part of myself behind in that abandoned place. I drove home in silence, the events of the night replaying in my mind. I listened to the recordings, the whispers and laughter as clear as I remembered. I wrote down everything, every detail, determined to share Emily's story. Maybe people would believe me, maybe they wouldn't. But I knew the truth. Some places are haunted not by monsters, but by memories, by the echoes of lives cut short and stories left unfinished. If you ever find yourself drawn to a place like St. Augustine Hospital, remember this. Listen to the voices in the dark. Sometimes, all they want is to be heard. And sometimes, the scariest thing you'll find isn't a ghost, but the feeling that you're not alone, that someone, somewhere, is waiting for you to remember them.